Hey, what's going on, everybody? Coach Connor here with the final episode of Strength Coach Rants for the year 2022. And today we're going to go off topic of training a little bit. And we're going to talk about my road to recovery, my maintained sobriety, and mental health when it comes to youth athletes. So welcome to the final episode of the year, and I thought there was no more fitting way to end the year than to talk about making changes and finding happiness, so that's what we're going to do today. I've written about my story a lot. I'm pretty candid about it, but I've never really sat down and talked about it, so this will be interesting. I'm not sure if I'll get emotional, if I'll be fine with it, but I'll link in the description the other blog posts where I've written about my life in addiction, coming out of addiction, and then my road within recovery as well. I'm going to go into a little bit less detail today. Today's not really about my life in addiction. That'll be a story for another day. It'll be an interesting one, but keep an eye out for that in the coming year. I'm sure I'll open up and talk about it a bit. Today's going to be more so just how I maintain my mental health, the issues that we're having with mental health with youth athletes, and things like that. So we won't get into any fun stories about me being living the life of a functioning derelict, but today we will talk about recovery and what it means and all that. I've wanted to do this episode for a while. I just never really had the time to devote to it, and I'm kind of on the verge of being ready to close that chapter of my life. I'm 2 years, 2 months, and I think 5 days into my sobriety now, and it just seems like, outside of kind of telling my story to help other people get through the things that they're trying to get through and get out of the depths of addiction that they're in, I don't really find too much purpose in it anymore, outside of it just me reliving it, and that's not really good for my personal mental health. So this will probably be the last time that I talk about my recovery. Like I said, we may go into my life in addiction. I have a buddy who has been in my ear about writing a book about it. So probably around the time that I start writing that, I'll get on here and talk about some of that. Like I said, today's not going to be my story of addiction. It's going to be my process of coming out of it and learning to live in recovery and in sobriety. I'm going to preface this with the fact that I'm well on my way to being happy. There's things that happened in the last 2 years that I could have never dreamed would happen for me. Things I've wanted for a very long time. People in my life that, I don't think I would have been ready for if I would have continued down the road that I was going down. If it didn't kill me, I would not have been prepared for the things that I have going on in my life right now, and I'm thankful for that. But it takes a lot of work, and today we're going to talk about that work. So in addition to it being like the end of the year and talking about change and wanting to make that change, there was a thing that happened this week and that kind of prompted me to go ahead and pull the trigger on doing this episode. There's a young man plays for the London Knights in the Ontario Hockey League, 18 years old, and he threw himself from the 8th story of an apartment building this past Saturday right after a game. It's sad to know that there was a kid that was 18 years old, peak physical health, playing the game that he loves, actually getting paid to do it because it's major junior hockey, playing at one of the highest levels of competition in the world for his age group. And his life, he felt so hopeless that was what he decided to do. There was another young lady down here just outside of Wesley Chapel where my gym is, who back at the beginning of the school year, it was back in August or September, took her life after being bullied by some teammates. And she was a young girl, had her whole life ahead of her, and it's sad, the epidemic of mental health when it comes to youth and youth athletes as well. It's horrible. It's a tragedy, and it's awful. A lot of these kids are suffering in silence, and I don't know, that there's enough outlets for them. I think in society we've done this really weird thing where we have made mental health, what's the word I'm looking for? We have made it so that it's not stigmatized, right? We've destigmatized it, but we've done it to the point of we have people who, try to seek out attention by self-diagnosing with all these different mental health issues, and it kind of takes away from what people are actually going through. If you're an adult, I don't have TikTok, but all the athletes that I work with do. A lot of the adults that I know are on TikTok, and it's just like the borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression that these kids get on TikTok and talk about. Like, it's insane to me. And some of that's real and some of it's not. Some of it is attention-seeking behavior. Let's not sugarcoat it. Some of that is real, but a lot of it is not. And you still have these young kids and young athletes who don't feel like they can go to people, and I don't know why. Like I said, we've destigmatized it to the point of it being like acceptable and understandable to ask for help. Like I don't know why we can't make headway here. I guess I take that back. I do know why. It's weird when you're in depression. If you're not somebody who's ever dealt with it, when you're in that hole, you kind of push everyone away. It's very strange. It's God, I forget his name, but he said it's the least exclusive club like in the world that makes you feel like you're the only member. And so when you're in those spaces, you push everybody away, and that's what happens with these youth athletes. And I don't know what steps we need to take to be able to get to the point where they're comfortable coming to people, coming to their coaches, coming to their parents, coming to teachers, guidance counselors, whatever the case is. But it just seems like I don't know how to fix that problem. I'm not smart enough to understand that. But what I will say is, as an adult who deals with these kids fairly regularly, you're a big part of their life when you're a coach. You don't really realize it. There's families talking about you at the dinner table, what you did, in your training today, what you did at practice today, what coach said to you, and the things that you say and do around and to these kids sticks with them. It's funny, as adults we sit there and we'll say, oh, kids are resilient, they can get through anything. And no, they're not. They're really not. They're kids. How many adults do you know that are walking around with some level of quote unquote trauma from their past, from when they were kids? They're not resilient. They're just really good at being quiet about it, and quietly dealing with it. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how to get to a place where everybody feels kind of more comfortable talking about it. Like I said, I think as a society that we've done a fairly good job at destigmatizing it, but it's so hard when you're in those places to come out and talk to anybody and feel okay, being vulnerable and not just pushing the entire world away from you. In an earlier podcast episode about traumatic brain injuries, I talked about the study from 2020 into 2021 conducted by the U.S. government. And 40% of high school kids were persistently sad or hopeless, and 20% of all high school kids in America were suicidal. That's insanity to me, and there's a lot of stress placed on these kids. There's a lot of from sports to school to I guess behaving a certain way. I don't know, but there's a lot of pressure on these kids, and sports needs to be like an outlet for them. It needs to not be this extra stressor placed on them. So like I said, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how we fix it. We can identify that the problem is there, and that's step one, but we really need to do a better job, I guess, being there for these kids. All right, so like I said before, we're not really going to get into my story of active addiction. It's going to be more so just touching on a few key points. Growing up, I was always a happy kid. In high school, excelled in sports. I stayed away from booze and drugs because they scared the shit out of me. I knew, due to my family lineage, there was opportunity for addiction there, and I did not want to be able to give into that. I knew if I picked something up, it was going to be very hard for me to put it down. So all throughout high school, I stayed away from everything. Buddies that go out and drink, and it just I think one time I went out drinking with my buddies and I woke up feeling like such a shitbag that I never wanted to do it again, and stayed away from it for a good while. I grew up around booze. In the family, my parents were regular drinkers. They weren't problematic drinkers, but it was around. I had it in the house. I saw them do it. It became kind of normal to be around it. And in addition to that, I played the sport of hockey, right? Hockey's an interesting sport when it comes to alcohol. It is the only guaranteed bar at a youth sports facility. You're not going to find a bar at the youth football facility, at the youth baseball fields, but you will find a bar at the youth hockey rink. Like, it's just the way it works. It's part of the sport. It always has been and it always will be, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. Like, it's just with it being a Canadian sport, I get it. Booze is just an integral part of the sport, and it will continue to do that. But that kind of normalized it for me. It made it something, that it just, what's the word? Like, the stigma of being drunk, like, was kind of taken away because I saw it so often. So, I stayed away from it, though. It wasn't for me until I started playing junior hockey. And then, we'd go out and we'd party, but this was something that would happen like once a month or, once every other month even, because we were so busy playing, and I also had a job, and there was a lot going on, and I couldn't afford to be, hungover because I was like a fourth line player. If I showed up hungover at practice, there's a good chance I'm getting healthy scratch. So, stayed away from it. I can't really pinpoint like when my quote unquote trauma was, right? Because there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the vast majority of addiction has a trauma trigger. I don't know what that was. What I will say is back in 2009, I lost the sport of hockey. I had played hockey my entire life. It was a very big purpose of mine. I played down here, excelled at it, went out to play junior hockey, excelled at it, played NCAA hockey, and I left playing NCAA hockey because the hockey was never going to pay the bills for me. And I was a history major at a liberal arts school of 700 kids up in Dudley, Massachusetts. And it just seemed like staying there to continue playing hockey wasn't in my best interest as far as my future went. So packed it up, came home, transferred to USF, and I played club hockey there and had a great time. It was fun. Got to continue to play the sport I loved at a relatively competitive level and absolutely dominate. I had 5 goals in my freshman year up at Nichols College playing NCAA hockey, and I had 199 points in 2.5 seasons playing for USF. So it was a little bit different. It was a lot more fun because, it's a lot more fun to dominate at things. But in 2009, I played my last game. This was right prior to me getting into the athletic training education program at the University of South Florida. And I didn't take it very well. I lost my purpose. That was my purpose for a very long time. At this point, I was 24 years old, had played hockey competitively for 12 years, with every step of the way, like the next rung on the ladder, that was like my goal, right? There was always a goal somewhere to get. I wanted to keep climbing that ladder, and all of a sudden it was gone. And that is, I think, what my quote-unquote trauma was. Even though it's not really a trauma, it's just a very big life change that I did not prepare myself for. So if I had to trace things back, I think that's probably where it was, because after that, I ended an engagement to a girl I had been dating for 5 years. I kind of changed a lot of things in my life, and I really started to drink a lot more. And I don't know if I was coping in the beginning. I don't know if I was doing it to distract myself. I don't know if I was just doing it to have fun, because I had been in relationships my whole life and never really gone out and done the, functioning derelict life. And part of me wanted to do it, I guess. But, anyways, so that's when it started. It progressively got worse. Every time in my life that I didn't have purpose, it would get a little bit worse. So, like, if I started here, right, if I lost my job, it'd go up to here, right? I'd get a new job, and then it would just stay here. It didn't come back down. It just kind of stayed there. And then, I'd lose my job again, as we do in this field, and it would go up a little bit more, and then would consistently, it would stay the same, and then when something bad happened, it would get worse. So this got really bright all of a sudden. Sorry if you're listening, you're not watching. All of a sudden, my screen is incredibly bright. Hopefully this doesn't transfer over to you guys. But so, throughout my life, every time something bad would happen, I would cope. I would escape with booze. That's what I did. And it got progressively worse. And it all came to a head in 2020. I left my job that I had been at for about 4.5 years, something I loved doing, but it just, it was a perfect storm. I wanted out of there. They wanted me out at that point. and something happened that I could not be quiet about, and I got very vocal about it, and that caused them to let me go, which is fine. That's what I wanted. But then, unemployed during a pandemic when you're not really allowed to work, I was trying to open up my gym, could not open up my gym because of the pandemic. So I was left with a lot of time on my hands, and it turned into, the whole idle hands thing. You give me idle hands, I'm going to put a beer in it. And I did. It got to the point where I was drinking 20 to 25 beers a day, every day. And I'm not going to go over like the life experience that made me decide to get sober. You can read that in the blog post that I'll link in the description. But it completely changed my life and got me to a point where I was just, I could no longer live like this anymore. I had known I had a problem for a very long time. I just didn't know how to change it, or even honestly that I wanted to. I was content living in my misery. Like it's weird, but that it really happens. A lot of addicts get very content and living the life that they do because it's like there's familiarity to it. It's normal. You're scared to death of change. A lot of humans, like, we're scared of change, and it's crazy, but like we are scared of change when it comes to even bettering our lives. You see it all the time. So it's kind of my story of, just skimming the surface of how I got to where I was. And now, we're going to kind of shift over and talk about recovery, how I maintain it, how I maintain my sobriety, the steps that I take every day to keep myself even keel and keep myself from going over the edge again. All right, so good news, the screen's back to normal. It's not quite as bright. I have no idea what happened there, but back to normal here. So I'm going to talk about recovery. So recovery is very different from sobriety. Early on in my recovery, it's triage, right? I am just doing everything I can not to pick up a beer. I started off, I was going to do this whole tapering thing. I was like, you'll tell yourselves lies, to be able to continue to do the things that you want to do. And I told myself, like, oh, you're going to go through withdrawals. Let's go ahead and, let's taper down. Tapering down from 25 beers a day, it would take me a year. So first night, I was like, all right, I'm just going to have 6, right? And 6 wouldn't have really touched me. All it would have done is get me to a point of wanting to drink more. So that 6 turned into 13 real quick. I bought another 12-pack after I had the 6. So I had a little bit of self-control in only having 13. But I woke up the next day and I realized I'm not going to be able to do it this way. I do not have the self-control to stop if I've already started. There's an old saying, at times one sounds like it would be enough, but once you have that, that first one, 1,000 couldn't quench your thirst. And that's how it was. I'd have one and, I'd get those dopamine hits and I'd be happy. And then I would chase that for the rest of the night. Sometimes, again, 20 to 25 beers in. So I quickly learned that tapering was not going to work. So it was cold turkey. That was the way it had to be. I woke up the next day. Again, like I said, it's triage. My resting heart rate's 150. I'm violently ill, throwing up, diarrhea. I'm sweating, but I'm freezing. It was the weirdest thing I've ever been through. I didn't hallucinate that I know of. I don't think I ever passed out, but I mean, it was horrible. It was awful. I don't think. There's a part of me that didn't want to get help and go to the hospital unless I absolutely had to, because I didn't want anybody to make it comfortable for me, because I wanted to feel how bad it was to have to go through that so that I'd never want to do it again. The first couple days are terrible. After I got to the point where I wasn't on and off the toilet every 30 minutes, I got up and went for a walk. That was one thing that I decided I was going to do. That was going to be part of my recovery strategy. When I wanted a beer, I would go for a walk. And in that first week, I walked over 80 miles. It was a lot. I wanted to drink a lot, and I didn't sleep much. I was sleeping for like maybe an hour a night, and that was only when I could finally get to sleep, sometimes at 4 or 5 in the morning, and then I would wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning and just do the whole thing all over again. I would go for a walk because my mind's just racing. I don't know if there's any other addicts out there, but when you're not using, you get very anxious, and I was anxious when I would wake up in the morning, like to the point I couldn't sit there. I'd have to get up and pace, and going for a walk would help me with that pacing. And I was up and moving around. At least I was burning off some of that anxiety. Started getting back into the gym more consistently. I went to the gym probably more than I should have, just to give me something to do where I didn't have to think about wanting to drink. I would drive to the beach. I would go to the beach by myself and walk, listen to podcasts. It was, like I said, it was triage. It was like, what can I do to occupy my time throughout the day so that I'm not thinking about drinking and thinking about like how miserable I am that I can't drink. It's really weird. Early on in recovery for a lot of people, part of the motivation is being able to drink again or use again. Once I get sober, I'll have this under control, and then I can drink again. If that's what helps you get through early recovery, great, do it. You'll get to the point though where it's funny, like early in recovery, I didn't want to drink, early in recovery, I wanted to drink and couldn't. Now that I probably could, I don't want to. It's funny how those things work. But so early recovery is triage. You're just trying to get through it. I was about 3 months in when I relapsed, and then some things happened, and I got to the point where it was really weird. I had just signed the lease to my gym. Everything was going good, yet I was so unbelievably miserable inside. I had this terrible string of like horrible self-talk, and it was just kind of telling yourself that you're a failure. There's a lot of reasons for it, and I won't go into all of that, but this horrible self-talk put me into a horrible place, when things should have been great. It happened to me during my time with the national team. It's they call it imposter syndrome. I would tell myself that I didn't belong there. Like I was only there because I got lucky. Like I couldn't help them. Like why am I there? When in reality, like I know I'm a very good strength coach. I'm very knowledgeable. They hired me. I worked for them for 2 years. I absolutely deserve to be there. But in the moment, I was just telling myself I didn't, and it's very strange. That horrible self-talk can put you in some terrible places, and it did for me, and that's when I relapsed. I went to cope again. That relapse lasted about a month and a half, and then I got out of it and got back into my routine again and tried to figure out, like, why, like, I was reaching for booze again. Like, what am I doing in my life that's making me think that, like, I need to go back to that? And that's when I realized, like, a lot of it is my anxiety about the future. Like, I'm a very anxious individual. If you're one of my clients, you probably see me kind of pace back and forth. I don't ever really stand there. I'm always doing something. I'm going to go grab a band, or I'm going to walk around, or I'm always doing something. I struggle to just sit there. Hell, like right now you're watching this. I mean, my shoulders are kind of going back and forth. I'm changing the way I'm standing. I'm an anxious dude. And, anxious movement, I get anxious thoughts too. And those anxious thoughts would turn into me like saying terrible things about myself. Now, have you ever had like a bully or a boss or a coach like that was in your ear all the time, like telling you how bad you messed up? Imagine that you don't ever get to leave that voice, and it's always in your head, and it's you telling yourself how terrible you are. And it's hard to come out of that. And that was what led me to relapse, and coming out of that and actually beginning my recovery journey now, right? This is February of 2021. I got sober in September of 2020. So you're talking October, November, December, January, February, 5 months before I realized what the issue was. I was walking around as a dry drunk. I still had so much work to do, when in reality, like, I thought I beat it. I thought I was sober, and it's just, that's not how it works. I had to find all new ways to cope, all new ways to like manage my stress, to manage my expectations, all that kind of stuff. And it took me a while to get there. I did not early on understand that booze wasn't the problem. Booze was a symptom of what I was dealing with. Booze was the self-medicating. Booze was like how I tried to fix how I was feeling. I never tackled how I was feeling. And it's crazy even now to think about it, that I went so long without even trying. I didn't even know that I needed to do that until I got to a point where I was just like, I was at the end of my rope. I couldn't live the way I was anymore. I was sober and I was still miserable, and I had no idea why. So, learning to manage all that, finding different coping mechanisms. I continued to walk. I continued to go to the beach. I would go to the beach for like an hour every day. I would drive an hour to an hour and a half to get to the beach, to be there for an hour so that I could find peace in my day. I would go for walks. I would listen to podcasts. I read, probably 15 books on addiction. Like from the physiological aspects of it to like the emotional aspects of it, how to deal with it. I learned so much about anxiety and depression, and like how like I was causing my depression. I was putting myself in there by this horrible self-talk I was putting myself through. So, recovery is very different from sobriety. You can be a dry drunk. I don't know what the term is for opiate users or, addictions with anything else, but I imagine it's the same. If you don't tackle like the issue, like the drug is not the issue. The drug becomes an issue because of you using it to self-medicate, but it's not the reason that you're so miserable. It amplifies it once you get into like addiction, but it's not the reason. You've got to root down in and like find out what it is so that you can maintain your sobriety and peace of mind and just peace altogether. All right, so now, I'm sober, a little over 2 years. I'm in recovery. I'm recovering. I'm mostly recovered. I get asked a lot of times like how I maintain my sobriety, and like the biggest way is like all I have to do is remind myself of how I was feeling like when I was in addiction. It is a place that I would not wish on my worst enemy. I mean, it is, you feel helpless, you feel alone, you feel physically ill all the time, you feel emotionally like abandoned, you're hard on yourself. There's absolutely no part of me that wants anything to do with being there ever again. And I've had some things over the past 2 years that have tested me in some very major ways, and I've still been able to understand like that's not where I want to be, and I choose to not put myself in that position again. So that's like the thought process behind maintaining my sobriety. I would say over the course of the past year and a half, since the gym's like really actually been open, I'm not able to kind of go through the same like coping strategies and mechanisms that I did back when I first got into recovery, because we had just signed the lease on the gym and all that. I didn't have a lot going on outside of having to be up here for a couple things here and there, getting the website up and going and all that kind of stuff. Like maybe 2 hours of my day was occupied, and outside of that I had plenty of time to work on myself, which was a godsend. And I don't have that time anymore. I'm here at the gym some days from like 6:30 in the morning till 8:30 at night. I don't have the ability to go for a walk, to drive to the beach, but I do have an amazing support system. My girlfriend is amazing. I feel often that I don't deserve her, but she is always there in my corner, listens to me. My family's been amazing. And just staying busy coaching. I'm only on the floor coaching maybe like 6-7 hours a day of that like 12 hours that I'm here. But there's always something to do for the gym, whether it's dealing with the books, answering emails, doing marketing campaigns, doing this podcast. Like there's a lot of things that happen, so I'm able to kind of keep myself busy and keep my thoughts from going crazy. But when I do, there's a time over the summer where we had a young man hurt in the gym. He fell off a plyo box and busted his face open, had to get stitches. I found myself going down the worst possible rabbit holes of self-talk, and what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of times we, I can't think of it right now, but like taking myself to worst case scenario, I am very good at that. And I've found through sobriety and recovery that is probably one of my weakest points when it comes to my emotional health. Is I don't know what caused it growing up, or if it happened in my adult life, but I will prepare myself in an effort to prepare myself rather for the worst possible scenario. My brain will do nothing but think about worst possible scenario. So that kid getting hurt led to me in my head becoming homeless. Right now, thank God, this kid's father was very understanding. It was a freak accident. It wasn't really anybody's fault, but it happened like under my watch, and I felt horrible for it. But it really did. It led to me like getting sued, losing my gym, becoming homeless. You know what I mean? Like I can take something and extrapolate out like the worst case scenario in my head. I was one step away from death there. And, that's something that I struggle with. And it is hard to get out of that. It's hard to get to a point where I don't take myself there. But now that I'm sober, I can at least pull myself out of it. Back when I was drinking, I would just, boom, booze, cope, escape, get away from it, don't think about it, wake up in the morning beyond anxious because I am craving booze, for one. But two, I didn't actually do anything to deal with the issue at hand. Now, being sober, I reached out to this kid's father. We talked. I made sure he was okay. We offered to cover his medical expenses and all of that. So like if I was still drinking, I could imagine, or even if I was the dry drunk that didn't understand how I needed to deal with things, that could have led me down a very bad path. There's been a lot of other things that have happened too that I'm not completely, I'm not willing to be completely open about everything right now. But some things that have tested me, and time and time again, my sobriety has come into play in a way that like allowed me to get through these things. So, I, and maintaining my sobriety and maintaining my recovery, it's done nothing but good things for me. And I will continue, to preach to people how important, taking ownership of your addiction is, overcoming it, getting into recovery, getting through recovery, and coming out on the back end, because like life is so much better. Like once you get through it, it gets so much better. There's so many people at the end of the rope, and they just need a hand, or they need someone to talk to them. And hopefully that's maybe one person sees this and it hits home with them, and they're able to kind of get through some things. That's all I hope out of this. But kind of to come back to it, the way that I maintain my sobriety and my recovery is to just understand that I don't ever want to be there again. No part of me wants to be there. No part of me wants to drag the people around me back to those places, because it has got to be hard to watch somebody you love like absolutely drown, and then like tie the cement boots around their feet while they're dragging to keep them down there. Like, it's I can't imagine. Like I've been very fortunate in my life not to have to watch anybody do that, and I'm sorry for everyone that had to watch me do it, but I don't ever want to do that to myself or the people around me ever again. And that is how like I maintain my sobriety and my recovery. All right, so I think that'll about wrap it up. Kind of talked about everything I wanted to. Recovery is very different from sobriety. You can be sober and not even skim the surface of tackling what the issues are. I was very fortunate that I was, I don't know, I guess strong-willed enough to kind of do the deep dive into figuring out like what I needed to do. I think I had a very warped sense of what happiness was when I was in active addiction, when I was coping, when I was self-medicating and all that. It's really weird to come to the conclusion that like alcohol wasn't my problem. I always thought it was. I thought if I could get sober, everything would be better. And that's not what it was. Like I said earlier in this episode, like alcohol was a symptom of like what I was dealing with, and I had to really dig through a lot of things to get to where like I understood what had to be done for me to get to a place where I could start to find happiness and peace in my life. So if you're somebody that's going through it, understand, sobriety, becoming sober, getting sober is like step one in this 100-step process. You've got to dig in deep and find out what it is that's causing you to self-medicate. It like booze was an issue, so like let's not get that twisted. Booze was an issue, but it only became an issue when I like couldn't deal with what I needed to deal with, and I couldn't like adult the way that I needed to from an emotional standpoint. So, getting sober is great. Get sober. If it's something that you've been wanting to do, you'll feel infinitely better. If nothing else, you'll feel good. You'll lose weight. I think from the beginning of my recovery process, I ended up losing front to back like 70 pounds. That's a lot of weight. It changed my diet, changed everything about my life in an effort to try to find out what the issue was. And I did. I found out what it was, and my life is infinitely more happy now. And if you're somebody going through it and dealing with it, I hope that for you too. Like I've said in like every blog post I've written about this, my contact information is on the website. If you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify or listening to it on Apple Podcasts, just go to the website, www.theldsp.com. My email address is on there. We have a contact page. You can get in touch with me, and I'm an open book. I love to talk shop about training, but I also love to talk about, how to be happy. I'm not an expert on it because I'm not quite there yet, but I am well on my way now that I've really gotten out of recovery what I needed to. So this is the last episode of the year, I think, unless I get a bee in my bonnet next week to do something. This will be the last one until the new year. So I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas, and I hope everybody has a Happy New Year, and I hope every change that you're wanting to make with your New Year's resolutions, you're able to stick to and get through it. And we'll see you next year.